The lights of the Congressional hearing room blazed down, transforming the space into a modern-day political coliseum. On one side, a powerful figure from a previous administration, armed with confidence and a plan to destroy a rising critic. On the other, a freshman representative, about to walk into what everyone thought was a trap. This is the story of an ambush that backfired spectacularly. This is how Jasmine Crockett was set up for a fall, and how she turned the tables in the most stunning way imaginable. The stage was set in a wood-paneled hearing room, a place where political dramas often unfold with scripted predictability. But on this day, the script was about to be torn up. Jasmine Crockett, the freshman Democratic representative from Texas, sat poised behind the committee desk. Her royal purple suit was a bold splash of color against the traditional backdrop, a visual metaphor for the disruption she was about to become. She shuffled her notes, preparing for what was supposed to be a routine oversight committee hearing on government transparency. Across the room, Kash Patel sat with a composed, almost unnerving calm. A former chief of staff at the Defense Department, his navy suit was impeccably pressed, his red tie a silent, bold statement of his continued political allegiances. He had been called to testify, but those watching closely could sense he arrived with a different mission entirely. The committee chairperson had barely finished the introductory formalities when Patel leaned into his microphone, his voice cutting through the procedural hum with a sharp, unexpected edge. Before we begin, I'd like to address something," he said. The room, previously buzzing with low chatter, immediately fell silent. All heads turned toward him. Representative Crockett, Patel continued, his eyes scanning the room before landing on her, has been making a series of public accusations about the previous administration. Accusations that are not just factually incorrect, but, in my view, dangerous to our national security discourse. A freeze frame could have captured the room in that moment. Staffers stopped typing. Reporters' pens hovered over notebooks. Camera operators, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, swiveled their lenses to zoom in on Jasmine Crockett's face. They expected to capture shock, perhaps fear, in the eyes of the junior congresswoman. Instead, they found something entirely different. Something unexpected. A slight, knowing smile formed at the corner of her mouth. She wasn't surprised. She was ready. What happened next left the entire committee speechless. In just 90 seconds, Jasmine Crockett would deliver a response so precise, so meticulously backed by evidence, that it wouldn't just defend her position, it would begin the complete dismantling of Kash Patel's credibility in front of the entire nation. Before we dive into this incredible political showdown, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have liked this video. We bring you the latest breaking stories of political confrontations that change the game, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's rewind and see exactly how Congresswoman Crockett turned what was meant to be her ambush into the opening act of Patel's most humiliating public moment. To truly understand the magnitude of this confrontation, you need to know the key players and why this clash matters so much in today's political arena. Kash Patel had built his reputation as a fiercely loyal figure to the previous administration. He rose from relative obscurity to become one of the most influential voices in national security. On paper, his resume was impressive: Department of Defense Chief of Staff, Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council, and Principal Deputy to the Acting Director of National Intelligence. A former federal prosecutor, Patel had recently positioned himself as a public defender of transparency and accountability, at least when it came to investigating his political opponents. But behind the scenes, many critics questioned his motivations. They pointed to his efforts to challenge previous congressional investigations and his last-minute Pentagon appointment after the election as signs that his loyalty was to a person rather than to established protocols. To his supporters, however, Patel remained a patriot, unafraid to challenge what they saw as a corrupt political establishment. Jasmine Crockett presented a stark contrast. The freshman representative from Texas had risen from a background as a civil rights attorney, a public defender, and a state legislator. Her direct, no-nonsense approach had quickly made her a rising star among progressives. Where Patel was calculated and strategic in the ways of Washington, Crockett was authentic and blunt, her style forged in courtrooms and community halls, not in political backrooms, what many people didn't know about Crockett, though, was her meticulous preparation. Behind her passionate public speeches was a lawyer's mind that collected facts, documented inconsistencies, and prepared for every contingency. She was ready for exactly the kind of ambush Patel was attempting. As the hearing began, a palpable tension filled the room. Staffers whispered nervously to each other, sensing that standard procedure was about to be thrown out the window. The committee chairperson tried to regain control, but Patel continued his unexpected offensive. Representative Crockett has repeatedly accused the previous administration of serious wrongdoing, but without providing concrete evidence, Patel said, his voice steady and practiced. She's built a significant social media following by spreading unverified theories about people who, I believe, served their country honorably. I think the American people deserve better than these baseless attacks from someone with so little direct experience in the complex world of national security matters. The Republican members of the committee nodded in agreement, some allowing slight smiles to cross their faces, as if they had been anticipating this moment all along. Several Democrats looked concerned, glancing toward Crockett with uncertainty. Directly attacking a member of Congress wasn't standard hearing procedure, and they worried how their colleague, still in her first term, would handle this blatant breach of protocol. For her part, Crockett remained preternaturally calm. Those seated closest to her noticed she wasn't frantically flipping through her notes or looking to senior members for guidance. Instead, she simply opened a slim, blue folder that had been sitting in front of her since the hearing began. A congressional aide would later tell reporters, "I've never seen someone so composed in the face of what was clearly a coordinated attack." It was like she had written the script herself and was just waiting for her cue. But Patel wasn't finished. He was building to his crescendo. "I think we need to address this now, before the hearing proceeds further," he insisted, because these kinds of accusations undermine public trust in our institutions. And frankly, he added, a hint of condescension seeping into his tone, they show a fundamental misunderstanding of how national security operations actually work in the real world. The committee chairperson, finally regaining a measure of composure, turned wearily toward Crockett. "Representative Crockett, would you like to respond to these comments before we return to the scheduled agenda?" All eyes in the room swiveled to Jasmine Crockett. Camera operators adjusted their focus with a soft whir. Reporters in the press gallery leaned forward, sensing a career-defining moment. On social media, political operatives prepared to clip and disseminate whatever happened next. Crockett adjusted her microphone calmly, took a deliberate sip of water, and looked directly at Kash Patel. What the nation was about to witness wasn't just a response to an attack. It was the beginning of a masterclass in political accountability. "Thank you, Mr. Chair," Crockett began, her voice measured but firm, devoid of any panic. "And thank you, Mr. Patel, for giving me this opportunity to address your concerns directly." She opened the blue folder in front of her, revealing a stack of meticulously organized documents, their edges bristling with colored tabs. "Mr. Patel claims I've made what he calls baseless accusations about the previous administration," she started. "That's an interesting perspective, particularly from someone who played a central role in what many nonpartisan observers have called one of the most chaotic and unusual transitions of power in modern American history." Several committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not going to be the polite deflection or flustered denial some had anticipated. This was a counteroffensive. "But since you've decided to make this personal, Mr. Patel," Crockett continued, her gaze locked on him, "let's talk about facts. Not accusations. Let's talk about the documented record." She pulled the first document from her folder, holding it up for emphasis. "On December 18, 2020, you were appointed as Chief of Staff to the Acting Secretary of Defense. Is that correct?" Patel nodded, a confident smirk returning to his face. "Yes, that is public knowledge." "And during your tenure in that position," Crockett continued, her voice sharpening, "is it accurate that there were significant delays in providing critical security briefings to the incoming administration? Briefings that, I should note, even senior Republican national security experts publicly stated were essential to maintaining our national defense continuity." Patel's expression hardened. That characterization is misleading and false. There were established procedures that we were following. Crockett cut him off, a move rarely seen in the polite theater of committee hearings. I'm not asking about procedures, Mr. Patel. I'm asking about your actions. Your decisions. She tapped the document in her hand. Let me be more specific. This is a public letter signed by 9 former defense secretaries, including 2 who served under the previous president, expressing, and I quote, profound alarm about the Pentagon's transition delays. Would you like me to read their specific concerns about the conduct of the office you led? The room fell completely silent. Patel's confident demeanor visibly faltered for a fraction of a second. The existence of this letter was known, but its direct introduction into the record in this context was a powerful blow. I don't think that's necessary, he said, waving a dismissive hand. The transition ultimately proceeded as required by law. As required by law is an interesting standard to settle for, Crockett replied, her voice gaining a steely strength. But let's move on from the transition to your claims regarding transparency, since that's supposedly the very reason you're here today. She pulled a second document from her folder, a motion so smooth it felt choreographed. This is your own sworn testimony from May 2021, before a different committee, where you stated, and I quote directly, I have always prioritized transparency in government operations. Do you stand by that statement today, Mr. Patel? Absolutely, Patel responded, recovering some of his composure. My record speaks for itself. Indeed, it does, Crockett said, that slight smile returning. Which makes this next document particularly illuminating. She held up a third paper, and the atmosphere in the room grew even more charged. This was no longer a public letter, this was something from the inside. This is an internal memorandum bearing your signature, dated January 5, 2021. It instructs Defense Department officials to, and I quote directly from your memo, limit information sharing with the transition team regarding ongoing operations in sensitive areas. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Can you explain to this committee how this directive to limit information aligns with your sworn commitment to always prioritize transparency? A wave of whispers erupted across the hearing room. A Republican committee member, sensing the tide turning, attempted to interject. Point of order, Mr. Chair. But the chairperson, clearly captivated by the unfolding exchange, simply said, I'll allow the question. Please continue, Representative Crockett. Patel's face flushed a faint pink. That memo has been taken completely out of context. There were legitimate, serious national security considerations at play that required careful management of information. National security considerations that those 9 former defense secretaries didn't seem to share, Crockett interrupted again, not allowing him to build momentum. National security considerations that, according to subsequent testimony from career military officials, were, and I quote, unprecedented and potentially dangerous. She pulled out yet another document, her arsenal seemingly bottomless. This is the sworn testimony from General Mark Miller, a man with decades of service, stating that your actions during the transition created, and I quote him directly, unnecessary risks to national security operations. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Is General Miller also spreading what you call unverified theories, Mr. Patel? The tension in the room was now a thick, palpable force. Journalists were scribbling furiously. Several committee members who had initially seemed supportive of Patel were now studying their own notes, avoiding eye contact with him. But Crockett wasn't finished. She was methodically building towards something bigger, laying a foundation of undeniable facts before delivering her final blow. Mr. Patel, she said, shifting her tone to one of almost philosophical inquiry. You began your career as a public defender, as did I. We both took an oath to uphold the Constitution. So let me ask you directly, as one former public defender to another, when you participated in efforts that multiple, nonpartisan sources have testified worked to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power, a process absolutely fundamental to our constitutional system, what oath were you honoring in that moment? Patel's expression darkened. That is a false premise, Representative. I never work to block the transfer of power. I am here to discuss government transparency, not to be subjected to a character assassination based on partisan talking points. Crockett nodded slowly, as if she had expected that exact response. I understand you prefer to discuss other matters, she said, her voice dripping with purpose. But you are the one who chose to open this hearing by questioning my integrity and the accuracy of my public statements. So let's be perfectly clear about who is dealing in facts, and who is dealing in partisan talking points. She turned to address her colleagues on the dais. Members of the committee, what we are witnessing is a classic deflection strategy. Mr. Patel knows that his record on these specific matters cannot withstand serious, documented scrutiny. So his tactic is to first undermine the credibility of those who would question him. It is a playbook familiar to every prosecutor and defense attorney in America, she continued, her voice rising in power and conviction. The record shows you were involved in efforts to promote disputed narratives about election irregularities. The record shows you participated in meetings where plans to challenge the certification of electoral votes were discussed. And now, you are here today, presenting yourself as a champion of government transparency. The disconnect is staggering. The Republican ranking member finally managed to interject forcefully. Mr. Chair, these accusations are well beyond the scope of today's hearing. Representative Crockett is turning this into a political spectacle rather than focusing on the important oversight issues we are here to address. The chairperson, feeling the pressure, nodded. I appreciate the ranking member's concern. Representative Crockett, I must ask you to connect your questions more directly to the matter at hand, which is government transparency. Crockett offered a thin, polite smile. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I assure you, my questions are directly relevant to government transparency, which is precisely why Mr. Patel is here today. In fact, I have just one more document to share that I believe ties all of these threads together perfectly. She reached into her now famous blue folder and pulled out a final paper, holding it up for everyone to see. The room collectively leaned forward. You could hear a pin drop. What could possibly top what had already been revealed? The hearing room was holding its breath. Jasmine Crockett had already delivered body blow after body blow, but she was hinting at a knockout punch. What was this final document? And how would Kash Patel react when he saw it? When we left off, the political world was watching in stunned silence. Kash Patel had launched a surprise attack, and Jasmine Crockett had not only defended herself, she had gone on the offensive. With a series of devastating documents, she exposed contradictions in his testimony. And then, she held up one final paper. A document that would change everything. The air in the hearing room was electric. All eyes were fixed on the paper in Representative Crockett's hand. Camera lenses zoomed in, trying to capture what it was. Kash Patel squinted, his confident facade beginning to crack as he tried to identify the document. Mr. Patel, Crockett began, her voice clear and deliberate, cutting through the tension. Are you familiar with this document? Patel's face, once a mask of composed authority, suddenly lost all its color. The confidence drained away, replaced by visible unease. He leaned toward his microphone, then pulled back, glancing toward his legal team. I can't confirm the authenticity of any document you're holding without examining it first, he stammered, his voice noticeably less steady than before. Of course, Crockett replied, her tone almost conversational, yet layered with gravity. Let me help refresh your memory. She held the paper higher and began to read. We need to control the narrative regarding the 20th. POTUS is counting on us to make sure the evidence of irregularities remains front and center. The transition protocols give us significant latitude. Use it. A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the hearing room. Committee members on both sides of the aisle sat bolt upright. The press section erupted in a flurry of frantic typing and whispers. Mr. Patel, Crockett continued, locking eyes with him. This is an email sent from your personal account on January 4, 2021, to several officials. It was obtained through a standard Freedom of Information Act request, the very type of transparency measure you claim to champion. It was authenticated by the Department of Defense Inspector General's office last month. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. Given this direct evidence, which explicitly discusses controlling the narrative and keeping debunked claims of irregularities front and center, would you like to revise your earlier statements about your commitment to a smooth and transparent transition of power? The room fell into a stunned silence. Patel's face was a portrait of strain. He leaned toward his microphone, then pulled back again, wiping his brow. The Republican side of the committee looked down at their tables, avoiding his gaze. That email. He began, his voice slightly hoarse, lacks important context. We were concerned about maintaining operational security during a volatile period. Operational security? Crockett raised a skeptical eyebrow, her voice firm. Or was it political security for the outgoing president? Because this email makes no mention of national security concerns. Instead, it explicitly refers to controlling the narrative and keeping evidence of irregularities, claims that multiple courts had already rejected, front and center. She leaned forward, her presence commanding the room. Mr. Patel, you began this hearing by questioning my credibility. You suggested I was spreading unverified theories. But this email, your email, shows that you were actively involved in promoting actual disinformation from one of the highest national security positions in our government. Crockett then turned to address the entire committee, her voice rising with purpose. Colleagues, this isn't just about Mr. Patel's actions during the transition. This is about the integrity of our entire oversight process. How can we trust the testimony of someone who, according to this documented evidence, used their official position to undermine the very democratic processes we are all sworn to protect? The committee chairperson, struggling to maintain order amidst the bombshell, finally spoke. Mr. Patel, would you like to respond to the document Representative Crockett has presented? Patel adjusted his tie, visibly trying to reclaim his composure. As I've said, this email represents internal discussions about managing public communications during a challenging transition period. It's being mischaracterized for political purposes. Mischaracterized? Crockett's voice carried a blend of disbelief and determination. She picked up another document from her folder. Then perhaps you can explain this follow-up message you sent just 2 days later, on January 6, just hours before the Capitol was breached. She read aloud, her voice clear and unwavering, delay tactics working. Keep information compartmentalized. Legal options still on the table per conversation with POTUS team this morning. The hearing room erupted in loud murmurs. Several journalists rushed out, presumably to file breaking news alerts. Republican members huddled in urgent consultation. Democrats exchanged looks of profound shock. Mr. Patel, Crockett continued, her voice rising above the commotion, these aren't conspiracy theories. These are your words, written while you held a position of immense public trust. You weren't a private citizen exercising free speech rights. You were a senior government official, using the power of your office to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power, all while having taken an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Patel's face had gone from ashen to ghostly white. I need to consult with my counsel before responding further, he said, his voice barely a whisper. That is certainly your right, Crockett nodded. But the American people deserve answers. You came here today presenting yourself as a champion of government transparency while attacking my credibility. Yet these documents show that you were actively working to undermine our democratic processes. She gathered her papers, tapping them once on the table to align them neatly before returning them to her folder, a gesture of finality. Mr. Chair, I yield my remaining time, she said calmly. But I would like to enter these emails and the supporting authentication documents from the Inspector General into the official record. The chairperson, still processing the seismic shift, nodded mechanically. Without objection, so ordered. The committee room remained in stunned silence. What had begun as Kash Patel's attempt to ambush a freshman representative had transformed into one of the most devastating political counterpunches in recent memory. The fallout was immediate and severe. Within minutes, news alerts flashed across screens nationwide. The hearing was abruptly adjourned. Patel, flanked by a growing team of attorneys, made a hurried exit, his legacy in tatters. In the days that followed, the story dominated the news cycle. The documents Crockett presented were scrutinized by every major outlet. Legal analysts debated their implications. Patel's consulting contracts were dissolved, his speaking engagements cancelled. The Justice Department announced it was reviewing the materials, and a full-scale investigation into the transition period was launched. But the most lasting impact wasn't just the downfall of one man. It was the new standard Jasmine Crockett had set. She demonstrated that in an era of political theater, substance still wins. That preparation and evidence are the most powerful weapons against bluster and intimidation. She didn't just win an argument, she redefined the rules of engagement. Her "bring the receipts" approach became a rallying cry, a lesson in using the system's own tools, like FOIA requests and official records, to hold power accountable. When Crockett returned to her district, she was greeted as a hero. But she reminded her constituents, this wasn't about me. It was about the truth. Those documents were always there. The real story is that for too long, not enough people were asking the right questions. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Kash Patel would be studied for years. It was a classic tale of David and Goliath, but for the modern age. It proved that you don't need to be the most powerful person in the room to win. You just need to be the most prepared. If this story of how truth and preparation triumphed over power and intimidation inspired you, then you need to be part of this community. We break down the political confrontations that change everything, giving you the facts behind the headlines. Smash that subscribe button and hit the like button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss one of our videos. Because accountability isn't a spectator sport, it starts with being informed. Subscribe now and join the community that demands the receipts. Her "bring the receipts" approach became a rallying cry, a lesson in using the system's own tools, like FOIA requests and official records, to hold power accountable. When Crockett returned to her district, she was greeted as a hero. But she reminded her constituents, this wasn't about me. It was about the truth. Those documents were always there. The real story is that for too long, not enough people were asking the right questions. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Kash Patel would be studied for years. It was a classic tale of David and Goliath, but for the modern age. It proved that you don't need to be the most powerful person in the room to win. You just need to be the most prepared. If this story of how truth and preparation triumphed over power and intimidation inspired you, then you need to be part of this community. We break down the political confrontations that change everything, giving you the facts behind the headlines. Smash that subscribe button and hit the like button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss one of our videos. Because accountability isn't a spectator sport, it starts with being informed. Subscribe now and join the community that demands the receipts.